Good day, everyone. This is how the Alekhine's defense starts, and after e5, knight d5, there are three main variations of the Alekhine's defense, which start with d4. There's also other options that we will look at later. d4, d6, c4, knight b6, and e takes d6 is the exchange variation, where Black can capitalize on the half-open center with g6, bishop g7, and eventually bishop g4. And the four pawns attack by white here is f4. And here Black can play queen d7 with castle long, and f6, putting pressure on white's d pawn indirectly. Or also he can play knight c6, knight b4, and c5, hoping to exchange the d pawn. And Black can also go for bishop e7, e6, and castle short, and f6, attacking the center. And also some minor variations like d4, b5, hoping to get bishop b5 and then c5. And now white bishop should retreat, or then white should block this check, because if white just takes, then this loses a bishop. So that's the O'Sullivan's gambit. And also possible is here just bishop c4, the Balog variation. But let's look at the main variations. So c4, knight b6, and now f4, 4 pawns attack. Here Black can take on e5, white takes on e5, then knight c6. These knights are putting pressure on c4 and d4 pawns, and I guess also on e5 pawn. And here bishop e3 supporting d4, bishop f5, getting that bishop into the game, and knight c3, e6, knight f3. This is the main line of the 4 pawns attack. Other variations for Black might be g5, the planning variation, and Black is hoping for this when White's center is wrecked and he has weak pawns, so perhaps taking on g5, this time accepting the gambit, is not very good. And okay, then the exchange variation is taking on d6, and here e takes d6 is solid, but c takes d6 is more sharp. And a third possibility is queen takes d6, but there is this possibility of fork at some point. Black can answer it with queen e6 check, getting out of the fork and then moving the knight, but still has to watch out for this, so it's not very not common. So if Black takes here, c takes d6 line, then Black is aiming to attack and undermine the white pawn on d4, and possibly c4 as well. Surprise, surprise. And usually he fianchettos his king's bishop and putting the other bishop to g4 to remove a knight on f3, which is the key defender of d4. And Black has knights on b6 and c6, and so a popular setup for white to prevent this black's plan is the Voronezh variation, and it means knight c3, and if g6 then bishop e3, rook c1, so counterplay on the queen side, castle, and b3 supporting c4, and now both of these pawns are quite strong, and this delays the kingside development, but black has difficulties to harass white's pieces or assail them, so that's why and there's no bishop on d3 that could be a target after knight c6, knight e5, and even no knight yet that could be met with bishop g4. So now if knight c6, then just d5, knight e5, and now this knight doesn't really have target. It's gonna be kicked around later, so that's why this is not very common anymore. e5 is considered to be the main line, and here takes, exchange, c5, and knight d7. If knight d5, then this pin is just too strong. If bishop e6, then bishop c4. So knight d7, and here black must play carefully to attack the c5 pawn, or to challenge it. And other possibilities are f5 with sharp play, or also e6, bishop d7, or a5, or bishop f5. So 4 other possibilities. So really flexible position, no pawn commitments yet. So that's why black wants to often take with the e pawn, because of this Voronezh line. So, and here usually black develops bishop to f6 through e7, because if he fianchetto is it's simply, then white can play knight f3, and bishop g5 can be a problem. Too many light square weaknesses. So okay, so that's the exchange variation, and then let's look at the modern variation, which is knight f3, not c4, and here white is more modest and hopes to hold on to this small advantage, and bishop g4 is most common response, and then bishop e2, and often black will even take on f3 because that's a strong knight, and well, other possibilities are g6, and usually white goes with bishop c4 of the Keres variation, and also black can just take on e5. This is the Lasker variation, and this can lead to a sharp sacrificial line. For example, if now knight d7, then takes and check, and this gives at least draw for white after queen g4. Now just repetition, but because this is quite bad, white can play c4, just hitting the knight, threatening the king. It's just you can check this with your engine. The engine might first not evaluate it as crushing, but it will turn out to be in the long run possibly. So that's why black most often wants to avoid this by playing g6 or c6. So and also here, if black plays knight d7 straight away, then, or actually over here white can play c4 if he wants to play for a win instead of this draw here. So that's not perhaps recommendable for black. And white can also retreat the knight to f3. And this is the Cengiz variation, and c6 is the Miles variation. And the idea is still to play knight d7, but only after this sacrifice is not effective anymore. So here white still has many sharp ideas like c4, knight f3, so that's why c6 is more common. And now c4 can be met with the interesting knight b4, and bishop c4 can transpose the quieter lines of the Cengiz variation, or then some independent variations can occur where black is avoiding this kingside fianchetto for some reason. So, but popular for white also is just bishop e2 or even bishop d3. Then black plays knight d7, bishop f5, just normal development. And if black does play bishop f5, then there's this idea that Kasparov developed against short originally, and also Polgar developed this. So that's why c6 has been replaced by the just earlier bishop g4 here, restraining the knight. So you could have just avoided all this theory by not taking on e5. Just should have just recommended bishop g4. But now you know what to play if black takes on e5, if you play the modern variation. And also c6 to black here is quite solid. Looks passive, but it's solid. And there's other choices for white also. The two pawns attack, c4 before d4, and here it can transpose to other variations. White can also play d4, but then black just plays d6, and it's just transposition of moves. So here usually c5, and then knight has to go to d5, and then white plays maybe bishop c4, knight c3, and black can play c6, e6, defending the knight, or and then white might try to play, or actually black tries to play b6 or d6 to challenge these pawns. So this is considered to be quite good for black. So, and another choice is knight c3 here, and here black can take on c3. This is the two knights variation in the Alekhine's defense. So or also e6 is possible. So it's quite uncommon. And also black has other choices here. Knight g6 and knight g8, the Brooklyn defense, but not very many people would want to play that. And knight e4 is very interesting. It's named the Mokele Mbembe, and here's some interesting lines: d4, f6, bishop d3, d5, f3, f4, g6, preventing any knight h5 stuff, I believe. Knight f3, g4, or also g takes f4, knight g5, e6, g4, queen e7, castle short. This gives an advantage for white. Or black can also play bishop g4 and h3, but usually black plays g4, and here knight g5 still, bishop h6, putting a question on that knight. That knight's gonna give himself up. There's this fork, and bishop queen d3, and this is a winning advantage for white. And also notable is that none gives these variations. Here, check, and bishop d3 with good advantage, or if black plays e6, then knight h3, queen g4, f3, queen f4, knight takes, and this is also good for white. So that was the Mokele Mbembe, which is also good to be prepared for. And white also doesn't have to play e5 here. Can play knight c3, which can lead to a kind of a Scandinavian variation. So which we looked at a couple of days ago, and yeah, this is pretty equal. And notable here is that e6 is not good because this loses a pawn. First exchange there, and then queen e2, and if black defends by bishop e6, blocking the check, reinforcing d5, then queen b5 check, and the b pawn is lost. And if black defends bishop e7, then just queen e5 wins, threatening d pawn and g pawn. So that's why e6 doesn't work here. So, and here there could be some complications after or actually, sorry, not this variation, g3 variation, which is maybe a little bit more mild. And here Harald Keilhak recommends taking on c, and then just playing queen d5. And there's some light square weaknesses, so perhaps white wasn't ready to play g3. It was too bold. And here queen f3 is best, because if bishop e2, or actually sorry, if knight f3, then queen e4 check, and bishop e2 is awkward because of bishop h3, and queen e2 is awkward because of queen takes c2, so that's why queen f3, and here check from e6, and queen blocks, because if bishop or knight blocks, then there's going to be bishop d7 with the awkward threat of bishop c6. So queen blocks, and then takes, bishop d7, bishop g2, uh, sorry, uh, bishop g6, castling, takes, d3, g6, rook b1, castle long, c4, and bishop g6. And this is seen as rather comfortable for black. So another option for white to fight d5 is e5, and here black has many choices: d4, knight of d7, and then if d4, e6 is played, it transposes to the Steinitz variation of the French defense. And also, well, e6 is possible there, it's quite sharp. And also black can play knight e4 or even knight g8. So those are some reasons why many people recommend e5 nowadays, transposing to the Vienna game. And more rare possibilities are Marotsky variation, which could become a King's Indian after g3, and here black can play d5, and f4. If d4, then that just gives a tempo for white in the French, so that's why f4, c5, knight f3, e6, and this is gonna be quite equal: knight c6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castle b5, and yeah. And white can also play bishop c4, and here black maybe should play e5, just going for the bishop's opening, because if black takes, then he has to deal with these exchange complications, and so I don't know if this is good for black actually, but so perhaps those were the main points about this opening. This was a bit long, but if you watched it all the way, then you probably have a good grip on what's happening in the Alekhine's defense. Thanks for watching. Take care.